The beginning of June was another case of quantity over quality, though when it peaked very high. I took this window to really try to comb through as much as I could, though like last time out, it was the larger promotions that delivered in my opinion. If you're familiar with the format of the weekly series, nothing here will be too different. I just decided to split the month in half in interest of time. If you aren't familiar, here are some terms and conditions as to how I go about doing so. Those being that I haven't seen every single match to have taken place, and the ones I do choose to talk about are all based on my personal enjoyment and nothing else. A slight spoiler warning, as I will be talking about match finishes here too. After watching 163 matches spanning 19 promotions, here are a few of my favorites from the first half of June. Every now and then, AEW books something out of the blue that when it's in the ring, it makes all the sense in the world. With Lio Rush on hand the night of this television taping, we get a dedicated singles bout against Roderick Strong on Collision, and I like this a whole lot. Roddy opens the match by venting his frustrations over the lack of involvement in the Casino Gauntlet match, bullying Lio out of the gate. It's no secret that he hits very hard in matches, though here he does a good job of conveying the chip on his shoulder. I enjoyed Lio Rush on the receiving end here. It was a much welcomed reminder of what he can do in this environment, as a lot of what he's been doing on the independents with the Blackheart gimmick hasn't been for me. Both of these wrestlers can be described as explosive, albeit in much different ways. Roddy is this unrelenting force with his strikes and his throws, and for Rush to gain some ground against this well-oiled machine, he needs to rely on his speed and erratic movements. He finds success in doing so while in the corners, where his agility and timing give him some much needed space. These sequences in the corners are incredibly snappy and make the transitions to the more bombastic moments feel organic. Rush sends the match to break after a pair of lopes, and there were some things of note in the picture-in-picture. Another really cool bit in the corner where Rush is able to bring Roddy to ground for a submission attempt, and on the flip side, Roddy cuts off all that momentum by yanking Rush leg first off the top and seamlessly into one of his many backbreakers. I began to focus on all of the action involving the turnbuckles and how effective both competitors are able to utilize them. It's a very straightforward explanation. Roddy frequently moves to them when targeting the back, and multiple times in this match, Lio is able to use his athleticism to push off of them or go to the top rope for an aerial attack. It's a simple and effective way of playing to both of these guys' strengths, and I thought that was a very cool detail. Out of the break, Roddy is back in control, and in one of the highlights of the match, launches Rush between the turnbuckles where he bounces off of the steel and onto the floor. It's an insane visual that is very appropriate of what these two are capable of. It doesn't keep Rush entirely out of the fight, as he puts together a spirited comeback later, though the Kingdom are able to provide distractions as he attempts to put this away on the top rope. This buys Roddy enough time to recuperate, as countering a frog splash allows him to hit the end of Heartache, sealing him the victory. This is the type of match I hope for when tuning into Collision. They get a lot out of 10 minutes, giving Lio Rush a nice showcase, while Roddy adds yet another great match to his 2024 catalog. If you haven't been tuning into Collision over the last few months, this is a really good place to start. A television feud that splintered from the Sheamus and Gunther war from the month prior finally gets its match. After putting him on the shelf and reminding everyone for weeks, Ludwig Kaiser has to answer to the Celtic Warrior himself. The early goings are as advertised. The two smack the living hell out of each other, and it rules. It's when Kaiser is backed into a corner for the first time, where the two add another dimension to this slugfest. To answer, he kicks at the right knee that was compromised during the Gunther match, before taking some petty shots in the corner and even spitting on his opponent. This only winds up Sheamus, and the two resume brawling, before Sheamus is able to do some retaliatory limb work to Kaiser's knee and hamstring. It's Kaiser's scouting that bails him out here. He's prepared to counter the 10 beats of the Bodhrán, which leads directly to his signature shotgun dropkick into the stairs. He's in firm control heading into the commercial break. It seems Kaiser has this in the bag, though his pettiness gets the best of him. When attempting his own 10 beats of the Bodhrán, naturally it backfires and gets things into even footing. The last section continues with the malice shared between the two, and amidst all the hard strikes, you get some of the more clever limb targeting from Kaiser before Sheamus begins to egg him on in the corner. At first, this took me out of the match a bit, as it halted all the momentum these two built up to for some WWE-style mid-match dialogue, but watching it back, it was a smart decision from Sheamus. It got Kaiser to take his focus away from the injury and start swinging recklessly. Sheamus theoretically should have the advantage if he can keep things in this territory. Unfortunately, the injured knee comes back to haunt him, as he cannot push off for a brogue kick. He has to take another approach, and makes the climb to hit white noise. Kaiser is able to escape, taking out Sheamus's legs from under him, and stealing the victory after he hits the mat. For this style of match to have this much time is great to see, and the energy it brings is not something you'll find every week in this environment. It's a big one for Ludwig Kaiser specifically, who has quietly had a good year between the New Day feud, some other tag work, and the singles matches he'll begin to have over the summer. He stands out whenever he's given the opportunity, which is impressive for somebody who really only gets to wrestle on the TV shows. June 10th saw the debut of the lineal successor to the Suzuki-gun produce and the Takataichi Despi Mania shows with El Desperado's Despe Invitacional produce show. The show was hosted and booked by Despe himself, with a mystery vortex gimmick, meaning the audience wouldn't know who would be wrestling until their entrance music hit. After a few hours of fun tags and deathmatch adjacent multi-mans, it was time for a palate cleanser. Former stablemate Zack Sabre Jr. was pitted against Hikaru Sato, a man with 24 victories in MMA to his name. It's clear that these two excel on the mat, and they came flying out of the gate in that regard. It's a furious grappling exchange to start, though once both men are back to their feet, Zack is caught off guard by a swift kick to the thigh. He's clearly rocked by this strike, and even while hobbling, he takes an opening for a leaping guillotine. I'm not going to describe every exchange in the match, but this sequence early on illustrates a couple of points that are important here. The first is that while Zack is presented as the standard of this style of wrestling, Sato poses a massive threat, answering and even besting him multiple times. The other is the confidence these two have in their own abilities is able to guide them through some very difficult scenarios. Zack is on the back foot after that strike, though never hesitates to take the risk to fly in with a guillotine. On the flip side, there's multiple times in the match that Sato actually lets Zack apply a hold, knowing it'll give him a specific window to counter. The most obvious instance of this being when Sato forgoes a rope break, knowing he can apply a hold to counter Zack, rather than taking a moment of respite. It's a very self-assured effort from Sato, which makes the result far from a formality. There are other tactics at play in the more even skirmishes, like Zack taking advantage of the fact that Sato only wears kick pads to the ring. This could also be a way to neutralize Sato's striking, an area in which Zack is simply outclassed. Going off of all of that, you can infer that there's a lot of moving parts, and while it does feel like a chess match at times, it's incredibly engaging for the entire 10 minutes. The techniques on display are impressive, and everything looks extremely painful. Fittingly enough, Zack wins by countering an armbar into orienteering with napalm death. It's a variant of the stretch muffler, a move that the event's namesake has relied upon for a very long time. While it's hard to imagine Zack taking the loss like this in a New Japan ring, it was very cool to see him pushed to the brink in this style. It makes for a heat check for ZSJ heading into his match with Hechicero later in the month. The Despe Invitacional excels as a vibe show more than anything, though this match stands on its own as a genuinely great bout. Speaking of Hechicero, the 11th featured a singles match between him and 45-year veteran Blue Panther in the main event of the Tuesday Arena Mexico show. The two met in a trios match the week prior, where Hechicero submitted and pinned Blue Panther in both falls respectively, though the pin was assisted by grabbing the ropes. Blue Panther took to the microphone in the post-match, and while I didn't look into any translations, it was pretty clear where they were going with this. Mano a mano, 2 out of 3 falls as per usual for the promotion. I've made a concerted effort to introduce myself to a handful of lucha libre this year, and one of the feel-good stories in all of wrestling in 2024 is the year Blue Panther has had. I've only known of him by name and reputation by those well versed, though everything I've seen of his this year has been awesome. There's an earnest charm to his work, and I think it adds to the appeal, making the matches themselves very easy to be invested in even if you're a newer fan like myself. I'm probably not the most qualified to discuss the intricacies of this match, but the story it tells is a universal one, and I think any wrestling fan can get a lot out of it. Both of these wrestlers are fantastic on the mat, though Hechicero is at the very top of his game. After a spirited 6 minutes spent almost entirely on the ground, Hechicero submits Blue Panther again, and it feels like we're only delaying the inevitable. However, Blue Panther gets Arena Mexico to rally behind him before the second fall, and it's clear he isn't going down easy. Fall number 2 only lasts a couple of minutes, and naturally feels incredibly frantic. Panther gets a flash submission on Hechicero, sending us to the deciding frame. While brief, it feels like something has awoken in Blue Panther, and the notorious audience recognizes this, making for an electric atmosphere for the finale. The decisive fall upholds the urgency of the last, though as time is against Blue Panther, he's forced to turn back the clock. The escalation of the match coincides with Panther's approach. He leaves the mat here to rely on a much more explosive repertoire to push himself to the finish line, with the crowd and myself only more invested with the exceedingly risky dives. Hechicero is calculated and surgical for the entire match, but the intensity ramped up allows him to lean in some more heelish tendencies between his posturing and striking, which only feeds into these super endearing Blue Panther comebacks. It all comes to a head when back in the ring, as Hechicero is able to hit his guillotine leg drop before transitioning into what would be the final hold, submitting the legend for the victory. Blue Panther may have lost the match, but his heroics made me buy in. The shift he was able to put in at 63 years old is nothing short of spectacular, and it's the kind of thing that reminds me of why I love this stuff in the first place. Staying in Arena Mexico, the main event of the Friday show might not have the emotional significance of the previous match, but it's outright one of the more fun watches of everything I've seen during this window. Things begin with Mistico and Mascara Dorada handling business, though when Esfinge misses a springboard dive, Los Infernales throw everyone to the outside before executing their game plan. They isolate the Technicos and begin ripping Mistico's mask to the dismay of the Arena Mexico audience. It's not long after they're able to do the same to Esfinge and Dorada before going back to divide and conquer tactics, leaving Esfinge alone in the ring. As the beatdown continues, you can see Mistico emerging atop the ramp, waiting for the moment to strike, and when Esfinge buys him some time, the comeback is on. The visuals of these three flying around with their masks torn is just cool as hell, and as I've stated in the past, these guys make this look effortless. Mistico has been a busy man over these last 2 weeks, between his singles match with Magnus, an appearance in Lucha Memes, and here in this tag. Something I've been so impressed with is the way he's able to control his body in midair. He lets that part of his game shine in the second fall, and we get there after he pins Averno with a sunset flip. The second fall only ramps up in intensity, featuring some dazzling offense from Mascara Dorada especially, and some great bits of character work, like Soberano Jr. being fully aware of an incoming stereo dive and letting everyone know about it. The Rudos later return to going after the masks, and in this stretch the favor is even returned when Dorada has had enough and goes after Soberano Jr.'s. I think it adds a certain nastiness amongst all the insane athleticism on display, and I really enjoy that dynamic. More revenge is extracted as now Esfinge rips open Euforia's mask, and just as Mistico and Dorada look to put things away, Euphoria storms into the ring and just outright takes off Esfinge's mask, and ending the match in a disqualification. Los Infernales take their pound of flesh, as well as Mistico and Dorada's masks in the process, bringing a harsh ending to such a fun main event. It's a great hook to end the show on, as I'm now eager to see how they'll follow up with this. And before I go, here are some honorable mentions. The Z-Brats vs Junior All-Stars tag from Dragon Gate June 4th. Between the fireworks and the brawling around Korakuen, I just had a blast with this. Kaito Kiyomiya and Keno vs Gabe Kidd and Jake Lee from Noah June 9th. Speaking of brawling and Korakuen, this is where the match truly shines. I was on the fence about talking about this one in the video proper, as it does drag quite a bit in the middle, but at the very least, go watch the post-match. I mean, look at this. A pair of Arisa Nakajima tag team matches, beginning with Best Friends vs Team 200kg from Sendai Girls June 9th, followed by Nakajima teaming with Veni to take on Shuri and Dash Chisako from Seedling June 12th. The Sendai Girls tag is one that I'm really glad that happened on this retirement road, especially considering the year 200kg have had, and the match, a part of her big Seedling gauntlet, is 15 minutes of each competitor beating the holy hell out of each other, and what's not to love about that? Elo and Mima Shimoda vs Dragon Kid and Starlight Kid from New Japan June 10th. When I called the Despe Invitacional a vibes show, this was the match that I feel really embraces that. The crowd was so into everything, and Starlight Kid's chemistry with El Desperado was a highlight. And last but not least, Sami Zayn vs Chad Gable from WWE June 15th. Far from the ideal pay-per-view match you would want from these two, but they are so good together that the Alpha Academy drama doesn't ruin this for me. And that is it from me. If you got this far into the video, thank you so much for your time and for hearing what I had to say. Be sure to do all of the obligatory YouTube stuff by liking and subscribing, and you can find me on Twitter at OuterStevon. Tune in next time when we look at the second half of June.